wish in one hand and crap in another one, see which one fills up first. I mean, what else do you expect these people to say? These people are the typical case study for sunk cost theory. They are all in. They were all in a couple years ago. As Alexander Mercurius said, they have no reverse gear. They have no exit off the freeway. They're going to keep going and going and hope for a Deus ex machina moment, or that the U.S. is going to come in and save them all. I mean, the Estonian Air Force has 4 planes. 2 of them are like twin-engine King Airs for transporting people. I mean, come on. So this would take a decade, and the people there are not going to trade their welfare state. Okay, this thing's going to be over in a year. They don't have 10 years. Okay.
You're watching Capital Cosm. My name is Danny, and today's guest is John Polomny. John, thanks for coming back on the show, my friend.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, let's dive right in here, John. Lots of things going on around the world, both in the world of finance and geopolitics, but I'll let you kick it off in whichever direction you want to. Well, for you right now, what is most topical on your radar screen?
So I think what's most topical is everything starting to gel in my mind about what this administration is trying to do. I take it back to an article I wrote in my newsletter recently, where they kind of, when they came into power, Bessonet and some of these other folks talked about this 3 arrow strategy, which was a kind of a cribbing off the Obama economics in Japan a few years ago. And the idea was to get inflation down, get interest rates down. And how are they going to do that? Get energy prices down. And I could see now, it's starting to gel in my mind that we've seen something like this before. Back in the early 80s, when after the Carter administration was in power, was a disaster. High inflation, feckless foreign policy, a bunch of new people that didn't know what they were doing got us, into a bad situation. And Mr. Reagan came into power at a time when inflation was way out of control, quite a bit worse than what we've seen. And they had a Federal Reserve chairman named Paul Volcker. And Mr. Volcker took it upon himself to raise rates very, very high. Fed funds rate, I think, got up to 20%. And what this did was it crushed inflation. But a byproduct of that was that in the beginning parts of the Reagan administration, it caused a recession, a fairly significant one. And what happened was inflation came down, and then they were able to cut rates because we had basically a 40-year cycle of lowering rates, which recently bottomed, and now we're in a cycle of higher rates going forward, but that's another discussion. So something similar happening here. It's not going to be raising rates, though. What they have done is, with the Doge, started putting these different things together. I think what a lot of people do, especially a lot of midwits or people that really don't pay attention, they just look at these things in isolation. They don't understand that there's an actual plan, there's an actual agenda here. And what I think is happening is, you don't have 4 years, you have 2 years. You have a congressional election cycle coming up. You basically
And
have
not even
18
2
months.
years. It's not even
Yeah,
2 years. It's more like a year and a half, because in
that's
the
right.
last 6 months, you've got to start campaigning.
That's right. So you got to move quickly. That's why you're seeing this blitzkrieg that's kind of freaking people out. The media, the other party, they can't keep up. And so what are they doing? They're not they want to get inflation down. They want to get rates down. How do you do that? They want to get the dollar down. The dollar's way overvalued. So what do? They send Elon Musk and his team out. They start cutting all the waste, fraud, and abuse. Cut back the fiscal stimulus, all that spending that was happening during the Biden administration that basically carried the economy. And if you don't get a recession, I mean, if you look at the Atlanta Fed showing the upcoming recession coming up. And so that environment, if you have a weakening economy, if you actually get a recession here early in this term, in the next 6 months or so, then you're in a situation where, okay, well, energy demand would go down, energy prices would come down. That's a tax cut for consumers. The Fed will actually cut rates. Okay, so interest rates would come down. It helps you also to roll the $6 trillion or the $8 trillion in debt that needs to be refinanced, federal debt that needs to be financed this year. By the way, this year and next year, it's 60% of the 32 trillion. So you get to have lower rates, term that debt out. You solve a lot of problems, and then the bet is that you do the deregulation like Reagan did, massive deregulation, streamline, and then the you set the stage for a recovery, down the line towards the end of the year and going into that congressional cycle where you can tout all the things. Hey, we lowered rates, we got energy prices down, we met our goals, got inflation down. I think that's the gamble. I think that's what they're doing. It kind of worked in the Reagan administration. In fact, it worked so well that he was a two-term president, and basically, the Republicans broke the stranglehold of. He was morning in America, is what they called it back then, and so it worked pretty well. Some people would argue one way or another. People have their biases, but they had a tremendous success and it gained them power, the Republicans, for quite some time. So I think that's what they're doing. I think Trump is open to that. Why? Because he only gets one term anyways. He's got a People might not like the people that he has surrounded himself with, but they are very smart, connected, switched on people all the way up and down the line for the most part. I'm talking about Bessonette, Lutnick, all these kind of people. And so they didn't just pull something out of their butt each day at these press conferences. This is a plan that they put together. Look who they have in there as the Secretary of Energy. I mean, you've got really professional people. So I think that's what they're doing. It's a gamble. It's a huge gamble. If it works, you could have a decade of MAGA being in power, which then leads down the line to maybe 4 or 8 years of a JD Vance, and then you can start maybe I'm just telling you how they may be thinking. I don't think this necessarily is the way it'll work, but you know, if you can get yourself ensconced in power, turn this thing around, get people going in the right direction, then you can maybe attack the entitlements. That'll give you the street cred, the credibility to say, well, now we did the first part of this, we're doing good, but we need to deal with some of these long-term issues. And so I think that's what they're trying to do. That's what it looks like to me. It's not being done haphazardly. A midwit or a Democrat would look at it and say, well, this is all haphazard. They're just in there cutting, doing this, or they're doing that. And it seems to be kind of a plan. And that's the way I'm looking at it. And so we'll see what happens. You look at the long bond, the rates are starting to come down. But we'll see what happens. We'll see if they're able to actually make this happen. Obviously, oil prices have pulled back quite a bit. So, and there's no drill baby drill happening. So I think that if they can take a mild or even a economic slowdown or a mild recession, this would be very helpful to them. And the thing that kind of clued me into this and got me thinking this way is during the last Trump administration, every day, Mr. Trump, the stock market, he was talking about it every day. If it was up, he would talk about it. If it made a new high, he would talk about it. He doesn't talk about it at all that much. As a matter of fact, the only time I did hear him talk about it was early on before he was even inaugurated, after he'd been elected, where he said, hey, this looks pretty high. You might want to watch out. So I think this is all. I think this is kind of what their plan is or what they're trying to do. I don't think they would mind seeing a kind of drawdown in the stock market early on, because that would help pressure the Fed to cut rates also. So that's what I think is happening, and it seems to be how I'm looking at things. That's what I've been telling my subscribers.
What about the size of the cuts so far here, John? You have been seeing cuts in the millions of dollars. He alluded to it in his State of the Union speech, but we need cuts in the hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. Are they? I mean, it seems like they really need to ratchet up some of the cutting here to reach their goals, so to speak. I mean, how fast can they cut? I remember the original goal was $2 trillion. Are they on track to meet that goal?
No, absolutely not. They won't reach that goal. I think they've got quite a bit of layoffs. If you look at housing prices in the Washington D.C. metro area, I mean the places things are being cut 20, 25% already. So I think if you get you know, I don't think just cutting, I think just stopping the crazy spending that was going on during the Biden administration, that was what was holding the economy up. There's been no growth in the economy. Plus, now you're deporting a lot of the, or people are self-deporting even now, a lot of the lower wage workers. I forgot to mention that. That's in full swing also. You got to remember what's the constituency that's Trump's constituency is lower middle class wage earners and small
Hmm.
business owners,
And
tradespeople.
non-asset owners.
Yeah,
So they,
yeah,
I mean, they would actually benefit from a stock market correction or a real estate correction.
yeah. And so if you get prices down, that benefits them because they're looking at the gas prices and they're looking at the price of eggs. Let's just
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be too flippant. That's really what they're looking at. Their living expenses. So if you can actually get that down. And so I don't necessarily think you need to cut all hundreds of billions, and they won't be able to. They're already, it's kind of happening just like I thought. I mean, you're starting to get all this interference. The media's turned out fully against every little thing. You've got these activist judges, so that's going back and forth. So, uh, but I think I do enjoy some of the creative things I've seen them do. They got blocked on taking the credit cards away from a certain group of people in the government because they were abusing them, obviously. And so they said, no, Doge, you can't cancel the credit cards, a federal judge said. So they just lowered the limits to $1. So they're doing things like that, or the same thing of like laying these people off or telling them, come back to the work or get out of here, that kind of stuff. So,
And he's
um,
shutting down the FBI headquarters too. Did you hear about this?
no, I didn't hear about that. I heard they
Yeah.
sent a bunch of people out into the hinterlands like Salt
Hmm.
Lake City and,
The field offices.
Birmingham,
Yep.
Alabama. I don't know why they sent 1,500 agents there. Probably so they would encourage them to leave and go somewhere else. Because who wants to go to? A lot of people were in D.C. to try to advance their careers, and if you get sent out to Birmingham, Alabama, you're probably going to be saying, "Hey," especially if you're a career person that wants to move up in government, you're not going to move up there. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's what they're trying to do. I mean, they've only been in there 6 weeks, right? I think it's 6 weeks. So we just have
Hmm.
to see how things play out. But I do think that's what they're trying to do. Like I said, I don't think they would be sad if they had a mild recession here and if you look at what the Atlanta Fed's recession predictor saying, growth is going to be negative. So they get their recession, the Fed cuts rates, then this thing turns around and then they can claim, look, this really works, blah, blah, blah. Because you're right, I haven't heard many commentators understand they got 18 months at max to get this going. And if it doesn't, then, if the off cycle elections, the Democrats get in power, Hakeem Jeffries has already told us what he's going to do. Impeachment papers will be delivered that day. As soon as they're sworn in, there's just going to be another circus. So you've already seen the minstrel show that's going on up there already with some of these characters. So, and I say that I don't care if that offends people. I mean, this Jasmine Crockett is a very highly educated woman, and she went full ghetto. They have the before and after. This is a minstrel show. This is kabuki theater, whatever you want to call it. So I'm hopeful, uh, that that's what you're going to get. So they're playing to an audience, their constituency that put them in there, and we'll see if it works. But again, you're still fighting the entire entrenched bureaucracy, the deep state, whatever you want to call it, establishment, the news media. So you have a limited window of opportunity, and if you don't get it done, then the window will close.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that he's done so far is presumably pull the United States out from the Ukraine war. Now, of course, we had his big clash with Zelensky last week, but now it seems like he may be walking some of it back, or at least trying to put some pressure on Russia. Here's a Truth Social post that he posted earlier today. I want to get your take on it. So it says here, based on the fact that Russia is absolutely pounding Ukraine on the battlefield right now, I am strongly considering large-scale banking sanctions, and tariffs on Russia. As if Russia cares for any more sanctions. But until a ceasefire and final settlement agreement on peace is reached to Russia and Ukraine. Get to the table now before it is too late. So, what is he trying to do over here? Is he to just kind of add a little color as well? Russia has been intensifying attacks in Ukraine too. So, is he trying to kind of keep Russia in line here, or is this all one big kabuki theater as well?
So I'm astonished by a lot of
You're
commentary.
looking for great deals on gold and silver coins and bars from a company that you can trust, then you've got to check out the good folks over at Pimbex. This year, I've really gotten to know these guys, and all I can say is you're not going to deal with a better group of people. They're a family-owned gold and silver online bullion company offering the essentials and more at industry-leading prices while always providing first-class top-tier service. That's PIMBEX.com. And if you're looking to convert some or all of your retirement account into real gold and silver, give Pimbex a call. They'll help explain the process and get you started on the right path. Your support at Pimbex also helps support the channel. So reach out to Pimbex today. You won't be disappointed. And make sure to tell them Danny sent you.
All of this. At one time, I was when I was on tools early in my career as a worker, I was in a bargaining unit and I was part of the executive committee that would negotiate. And my union sent me to school to learn how to negotiate contracts, learn how to negotiate with other people. And one of the first things that you need to do is you need to understand what the other party's negotiating, what the other party's trying to achieve in the negotiation. Nobody in Western Europe or in the United States that I can see foreign policy apparatus, even Mr. Trump's, is listening to the Russian Federation's viewpoints. There are 4 items that are required by the Russian Federation to end the special military operation. It's been repeated by Mr. Putin, Mr. Lavrov, Maria Zakharova ad nauseum. Demilitarization of Ukraine. Well, that's what the SMO is doing, slowly but surely. Denazification. Okay, that means getting rid of the Banderite element in that government, being purged out of there. Okay, it means a guarantee enshrined in the constitution of whatever government comes into power in Ukraine that they will not ever join NATO. Okay, and fourth, an overall European security arrangement that incorporates and takes into considerations Russia's legitimate security concerns relative to the rest of Europe. No one's discussing any of this on our side. Mr. Trump seems to be thinking, he likes to talk in terms of card games. So he said that, Mr. Zelensky doesn't have any cards. Mr. Trump's cards are jack 2 off suited, and the Russians have aces, and we're getting ready to do a flop. Which cards would you rather hold? What sanctions is Mr. Trump going to put on the Russians that haven't already been put on the Russians? There's over 10,000 sanctions on the Russian Federation. They, along with China and other folks, have already created an alternate SWIFT system. So they already do banking. You already have LNG cargoes. I think up to 25 or 30% of Europe's gas is still coming from. What cards is he going to play? See, the problem with Mr. Trump is a boomer who still is living in the 70s and 80s and thinks the United States still has, it's Alexander Haig and George Shultz and it's the Cold War, and we're going to have the Soviets submit. This is not what it is. The Russians are winning the war. There's not going to be why would they have a ceasefire? Well, Russia's getting ready to collapse. Well, I've heard this for 3 years now. It hasn't collapsed yet. I've heard all this NATO, NAFO propaganda and nonsense and cope, but it hasn't happened. The Russian Federation can't do this forever also. But how much longer can the Ukrainians and Western Europeans do this? I mean, this looks like, a fart in a mitten or something. I don't understand. No one's talking about, and here's the problem that I have with all of this. Those 4 things that the Russian Federation has put out there as their goals, those are the stated goals. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. No one does. There's secret negotiations. Maybe the Russians have backed down from those. But that's what they have said publicly from day one and continue to say. and no U.S. president or no one in Western Europe can agree to those terms. And so, unless there's something happening behind the scenes that I'm not aware of, you know, contrary to popular belief, Mr. Putin's not a dictator. He just can't do whatever he wants in the Russian Federation. There are different factions there. There are different political factions, and he can't. They've lost at least. It's not a million like everybody says. These facts are. They've probably lost. If the Ukrainians have lost a million dead and wounded, the Russians are probably. If you look at the artillery, 5-1, they're probably 250,000 dead and wounded. That's a lot of blood to give up and just have a ceasefire so that we can let Ukraine rearm and end up where we are right now 10 years from now. If you talk to Russian soldiers on the front lines, if you talk to Russian people in the streets, what the soldiers will tell you is, why are you here? Why do you want to do this? So that my children and grandchildren don't have to fight this war. They don't want to. What sense does it make to have a ceasefire in a DMZ so that we can let Europe rearm Ukraine and do this again in 2035? It's not going to. That's not how it's going to happen. And Russia is not in a position on the battlefield. I don't know what's going on in the Russian Federation's finances. I know they have an inflationary economy, a wartime economy, or how much longer they can continue this. I'm not in the CIA, but right now they're winning on the battlefield. They are attriting the forces. There's nothing left to send there. And when I look at the tactical situation on a day-to-day basis of all the people that I follow, yes, in any battle across a 700 to 800-mile front line, the Ukrainians are going to gain sometimes, and that the narrative has changed since 2022 and 2023. The Russians are advancing, and that makes sense because they have attrited the Ukrainian forces sufficiently where they are able now to. What they do is they look for soft spots, and then they exploit those. And then when the Ukrainians beef those areas up, they poke around and probe and find another one. That's why you see this movements all around Chasiv Yar, Kupiansk, Donbass, Velika, all these different places. And then it'll go for a week or two, and then the Ukrainians will stop the advance, and then it's like running around the little boy putting his finger in the dike. So I think Mr. Trump is misinformed. I think there's people misinforming him when he comes out and says that the Russians have over 1 million casualties. No, they don't. How is that possible when they've been dominating the air, they dominate in artillery? It's just not. That's not how things done. When most of the battlefield losses are from artillery, drones are even. I don't see that, and so I think he may be operating from a stance. Now, I think that the Russians would like for this to end. Everybody wants it to end, but again, so many people have been killed, so much sacrifice has happened. I think saying, well, we're just going to freeze the conflict, have a DMZ, and have troops from Congo and Mongolia patrol a DMZ for the next 50 years. That's not going to be acceptable to some of the other factions inside the Russian Federation. And I think another thing that people in the West don't have a concept of, they don't understand fully the Russian psyche. The tolerance, I think it was Tolstoy or one of these guys, the tolerance for suffering amongst Russians, it's almost ingrained genetically. Don't underestimate how far they will suffer for a cause. I remember when Leningrad, with the peak of the Battle of Leningrad, there's statues there in St. Petersburg now. You can see the furthest advance into the city by the fascist forces. There was a call up for people, so workers and peasants responded. They came to the city. They were handed a rifle and a full magazine. And that they did meet wave. They did go immediately to the front with no training, and a lot of people died. This is the psyche of the Russian people. That's not the psyche of the people in the West currently in 2025. And so people shouldn't underestimate their tolerance for suffering and deprivation on a cause like this that they consider to be existential. And no one is listening to what the Russians are saying. People just keep talking. Kalakalis, uh, Keir Starmer, Macron, all these things are saying are all ridiculous. And now this thing that Trump said, what's exactly is he going to do? Is he going to call the Saudis up and they're going to drive the price of oil down to $45 a barrel? I mean, do people fully understand, what that, why would, are they going to do that? I mean, so what is he going to do? What he does is he says stuff, but I think, if you're holding Jack 2 unsuited against, an ace king suited, your chances of winning are, we haven't seen the flop yet, obviously, because we don't know what the negotiations are. I'm using card analogies because that's what he likes to do. But, you know, uh, how much longer can this thing go on? The other thing is that I think his advisors are telling him, and he probably knows, he needs to wrap this thing because otherwise he's going to own it. He has a window
Mhm.
that's closing rapidly that he can just dump this on the Europeans and the Biden administration. If he continues down this without closing this thing, I'm talking about probably in the next couple weeks. That's why you're seeing the weapons being cut off. That's why you've seen the money cut off. That's why you've seen ISR support, so they can't use HIMARS. So the Ukrainians are being forced to go to the table. And so, but I don't see, based on the four things that the Russians have articulated, that any U.S. leader or Western European leader can agree with that. So I think what you're going to see, I'm not saying that it's the case, because again, I don't know what's going to happen or what discussions are happening, is that unless the Russians don't want to end up with an agreement that they know the West is, they know that we have elections here every 2 and 4 years. You could get Gavin Newsom in there in 2028, and we're right back to, crank this thing back up again. And they're right
That's
back to
why they
doing,
restrained themselves for 3 years, because they knew, or 2.5 years, because they knew that they could get someone in other than Biden who may not, who may see it differently.
exactly. So I think that if people aren't willing to take that into consideration, it's going to require those things. And people don't want to talk about this because it goes down to trade. What are you talking about? This whole thing of denazification. The Banderites from Western Ukraine, who have a nationalistic, extremely ultra nationalistic, fascistic uh, uh, way of thinking, are who control the Ukrainian government. Okay, you're not dealing with rational people here. These people are fanatics. Okay, they believe what they believe. They actually believe it. Okay, and they're not going to give up power. You have a whole state there now. You have 40,000 SBU agents. Those are akin to Stasi or KGB, whatever you want to talk about, running around. You have a whole state apparatus that's benefiting from being in power. They don't want to give up power. These people all have to be purged from government. They're not going to be left in any type of power. There's going to be a neutral state there. And so if they can't, that means the United States is going to have to remove Zelensky and these people and put a more uh, well, that's not democracy. But we're past that. We're past the coffee hour thing. So I don't know what's being discussed. I don't know. Maybe the Russian Federation is on the brink of collapse and they need to get a deal. Any deal that may be possible. I don't know. But I don't see anybody addressing these issues. And because the failure of Munich and Minsk 1 and 2 and all the other agreements, what is it worth to sign another Minsk 3 agreement or an agreement based on what they had in Istanbul in 2022 when they could have ended this war? Okay. The Russians can wipe their backside with it as soon as you have another election here in the U.S. and Victoria Nuland and the rest of the neocons slither back into government and get this thing cranked up again. Okay. So I don't know. My view is that I'm going on the last what they say have they been saying for 3 years. For Mr. Putin's been saying since 2007 what they want, which is an overarching security arrangement that takes into fact, Russia's concerns, which everybody continues to ignore. And but I don't see how any administration or government in Western Europe can agree to those terms. And so it makes you think, do we get to the point where, well, at the end of World War II, when they brought Admiral Ryder in, who was representing the German government at that point in time, there was no negotiation. A piece of paper was put in front of him and he was told to sign the terms. Same thing in Japan on the battleship Missouri, I believe it was. The Japanese representatives. There was no negotiation. They were brought there. They sat in a chair. A piece of paper was put in front of them. Those are the terms. Sign them or else. So I think the Russians people should not underestimate the fact that the Russians may be prepared to go all the way to the Polish border if they have to, and it may take another 5 years, but they may be prepared to do that if they're not listened to. And I don't see anybody listening to them. So, there was people that were killed in Odessa during the anti-terrorist operations that were Russian people that were burned to death in the trade union building. Most people in the West don't know this. The names of the perpetrators that were Banderites and Ukrainian nationalists, the Russians know who they are. They want them to stand trial. In Russia, that is a big deal, what happened there, okay? Russia considers Odessa a Russian city. That has to be litigated. That has to be adjudicated. No one's talking. Well, we're just going to get a deal. We're just going to get a deal, and everybody's going to be happy because I'm Trump and I do deals. Okay. It may happen, yeah, but it may not happen. So this thing may go on longer than people think, and we'll see.
Yeah, speaking of Poland, we just had a few comments here from Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. He said today that every adult male should be trained for war by the end of 2025. According to Tusk, Poland should also be given access to nuclear weapons. And then on top of that, we also have this from the National Interest newspaper. This is from Sweden. And it says, as a new NATO member, Sweden is preparing for a potential war in order to be ready for a potential conflict with Russia. The Swedish military has acquired 44 new German Leopard 2A8 tanks. The modernization of existing armored vehicles is also continuing. So you've got Poland, you've got Sweden, you had Keir Starmer last week talking about deploying boots on the ground in Ukraine. Is Europe really setting the stage for an actual kinetic war with Russia? Are they serious here, or are they just trying to play a bluff or something? What's your take on this, John?
Well, back in my old days in spending in the south part of the U.S., I used to have a saying. I'll clean it up a little bit. Crap in one hand, wish in one hand, and crap in another one. See which one fills up first. I mean, what else do you expect these people to say? These people are the typical case study for sunk cost theory. They are all in. They were all in a couple years ago. As Alexander Mercurius said, they have no reverse gear. They have no exit off the freeway. They're going to keep going and going and hope for a Deus ex machina moment, or that the U.S. is going to come in and save them all. Okay. Um, it's interesting. You have this unelected person who was a failure as a German defense minister. She's acknowledged when the West German troop, or the German troops, showed up for NATO exercises with brooms because they didn't have rifles. Who thinks that, I'm talking about Ursula von der Leyen, who thinks that the European Union is her personal Ken and Barbie playhouse. This other ridiculous person from one of these Baltic villages, Kaha Kalas, and the rest of these nonsensical people. They're going to spend $900 billion rearming. Did you see what happened to the bond yields all across the EU after this announcement? They shot straight up. You can either have a welfare state, or you can have and how does France think about Germany rearming now for the third time in 100 years or 120 years? Is that really what Europe wants to see? These people are off their rockers. What they should do, you have a situation where the EU project is now demonstrating itself to be untenable. These people are all in. There's survey after survey of people that are of military age that even if their country was invaded, they wouldn't want to defend it. Okay, these people have been so you have people that may be right-wing youth that have no confidence in this global homo leadership that they see. You have people on the left wing that are soft, that don't want to fight. Where are they going to get the soldiers? I heard the German minister, I think his name's Petraeus, I forget his name. He said there may have to be conscription in Germany. I mean, these people are ridiculous. Yep. There's going to be mass uprisings. No one wants to go to war over 2 freaking oblasts in eastern Ukraine. This is nonsense. but yet they continue on with this, with the dream, because if they don't, what's the alternative? Are they all supposed to get together in Brussels and say, well, we're really sorry. We killed a bunch of people and spent a bunch of money and impoverished a bunch of people in Western Europe. I guess we were wrong. I mean, that's just not how this works. So they're going to continue on down this path. Um, and I think the idea is, at least for Zelensky, is to somehow, some way or another, by hook or crook, somehow get British and French troops in there as a tripwire, then they're attacked, and then they can run to the U.S. It's an Article 5. Trump's already kiboshed that by saying, if you put troops in there, do what you want. That's not, if they get attacked, which the Russians say they will attack them, it's not an Article 5 declaration. We're not going to support you. So there's a lot of things moving around. It goes back to the old first, the guy that was the first head of NATO after World War II. The purpose of NATO is to keep America in Europe, keep Germany down, or keep Russia out of Europe and keep Germany down. And so there's a lot of things, and you can see the fractures are happening. If any, when people were watching these things, did they notice the expressions on Giorgia Meloni's face? We already know how Orban and
Hmm.
Fico think about this, and some other people in some of the smaller Eastern European countries. But Giorgia Meloni did not want to be there. She doesn't
Yeah.
want anything to do with this. She's already said there will not be any Italian troops put in there for any peacekeeping or anything. So the fractures are developing. So again, I don't know what's going on. I'm not invited to these meetings. Nobody debriefs me or debriefs with me. So I can only go by what I see and by human nature. I just don't see these people are as being serious people. There's no real diplomats. It's a bunch of people that basically are all in and on a hope and a prayer with holding bad cards. You know, you don't go all in on a, on a gut shot straight, hoping with not that many outs. If people want to use these card analogies, sometimes it works. Most of the time, it doesn't work. So, I think we're rapidly coming to a point where time is running out. I think the Russians realize that time is on their side too, as long as they don't have an economic implosion in their country. Um, but again, what sanctions haven't been put on them that are still available to be put on them that are going to motivate them to come to the table? I don't see it. So we'll see. I think things are going to come to a head. I think eventually, you're at the stage here in this war where, if you listen to some of the troops that are on the Ukrainian side, some of these guys haven't been rotated out for 3 years. They've been on, people that have survived. They've been on the front line for 3 years, and people are exhausted. The psychological turmoil. You see the advances. Certain brigades have taken phones away from people so they can't watch the news and get demoralized. I mean, you start figuring this out. I was in the military. I was never in combat like this. No one in the U.S. military since World War II has been in this kind of combat, or maybe Korea. But just being on a deployment for 90 days away from your family, it starts wearing on you, and the morale, the lack of supplies, the constant. You listen to a guy like Patrick Lancaster who gives reports from the field. Just the amount of drones in the air, he just goes there to report, and he's almost, one of his colleagues was recently killed. The amount of psychological uh, weight that's on all these men's head just from all the drones constantly harassing everyone or trying, you can be killed in an instant. So um, I just see this as being like the Germans, this being the Western Front in 1918, or our own Civil War in the 1965, 1865. You just, the Confederacy and the Germans just basically ran out of the ability to continue, and I think that's what's eventually going to happen with the Ukrainians as they run out of support, and then things are going to start breaking at certain points. And once it breaks, then and you start getting maybe some big arrow moves. I mean, what's it going to look like when Russians move into Dnipro province or Oblast, which are only 5 kilometers away? That's a psychological blow. Or if they're gonna be, finally, it looks like this Kharkov salient's being closed by the Russians, and there's 10 or 15,000 guys trapped in that, and they lose that. That was supposed to be, or Kursk, their big that big thing that was to be a negotiating tactic. They lost 60,000 men trying to hold that thing. So these are psychological blows, and eventually people just throw the towel in. I mean, there's over 100,000 cases that the SBU has for deserters in the Ukrainian army. These things are reported by the foreign press that aren't under the sway of the, Atlanticist media that you can hear about. Of course, many people just dismiss it as Russian propaganda, that, we just need to keep supporting these people and then we'll be in Moscow by the summer and, dispatch Mr. Putin and bring him on war crime. I mean, you have Kalakala saying this. What are they saying? They need to go back to the original borders. Putin needs to be sent to The Hague for war crime trials. The Russians have to pay for reconstruction. If this is your point of starting negotiations, there is no negotiations. That's why they're not invited to the meetings, because these people are ridiculous. So I'm hopeful that Mr. Trump just is smart enough to get out of this thing. It looks like, if you just look at the actions, cutting off the weapons, cutting off the money, cutting off the ISR support, is basically saying, squeezing them to try to get them to the table. But we'll see. I kind of was long-winded on this, but I mean, this is ridiculous. This just goes on and on and on. And, again, it's just listening to these so-called leaders. There's no leadership. The Europeans are cry bitching that no one's including them. Why don't they get their foreign ministers together and go to Moscow and talk to the Russians? No one's stopping them from doing that. No one's stopping Mr. Zelensky from doing that. They don't want the war to end. It's to their benefit currently. So I don't know. That's kind of my view on things. Things can change immediately, but there's a lot of plates in the air. We'll just have to see how things. But I think this is the year that something is going to break one way or the other. Either the Russians are going to collapse the economy and they're just going to have to do something. I don't necessarily think that's going to happen, but more than likely, the whole coalition of the West is just going to start fraying. If the U.S. pulls out, it's all over. I mean, that's basically the main funder and instigator of this thing.
So we had a meeting between Hegseth and his counterpart over in the UK yesterday. I don't know if you saw this yet, but here's a few minutes of that. Let's go ahead and play it really quick.
Because we know, well, Mr. Secretary, your entire delegation, welcome to the Pentagon. It's great to see you. It's wonderful to meet you the first time in Brussels and have some great interactions about our mutual interests, no doubt. And your Prime Minister, it was a privilege to meet him as well when he was here last week. Our nations, as you know, share a long and special relationship, stronger today than ever before. I experienced that firsthand myself, as many of our generation has, on the battlefield, shoulder to shoulder with British troops in Afghanistan. I know how capable they are, how tough they are, and how close our bond is as brothers across the Atlantic, full stop. And so we're grateful for the many years that we have stood by each other's side. And also, at the same time, we are in the middle of a dynamic security environment where on that continent, President Trump is calling on our European allies to take the lead. And you have done just that, sir. In fact, you chaired the first meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group that I had a pleasure to speak to. That was your first time as chair, and you'll continue to. And that's, again, the United Kingdom stepping up. And then once again, when your prime minister was here, you called me. We had a chance to speak briefly about the increase in defense spending that the UK is undertaking. So UK leadership is absolutely critical, and we very much appreciate it. We want to work together to achieve peace and security in Europe by working to bring an end to the war in Ukraine, building sustainable deterrence on the continent, and then increasing our allied capabilities and interoperability. And European leadership of NATO, led by the UK, led by others, is, we believe, the future of defense on the continent, ensuring we provide a peaceful future for your kids, and my kids, and your grandkids, and my grandkids. That's ultimately what it's about. I also want to thank the British people for the warm support they give the U.S. forces stationed in the UK as well. It's a long-standing relationship that we are very grateful for. So you're true allies, longtime friends. We're new friends, but we're getting there, and fellow warriors. So thank you very much for being here, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for such a warm welcome and such warm words. It's great to be back in Washington, and it's good to see you again. We last met last month in NATO, and then you challenged Europe to step up. You challenged us to step up on Ukraine, on defense spending, on European security, and I say to you that we have, we are, and we will further. And last week, the British Prime Minister announced the biggest increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War, and we will go further.
So he's basically passing on the torch, the baton, to the UK to take up the remainder of the Ukraine war. Is that how you see it as well? Because it appears that their focus, i.e., the Defense Department under Trump, their focus is the Pacific. Not Trump said it himself. There's a big ocean dividing us in Russia. Why do we need to spend $350 billion while Europe's only spending $100 billion? And they're closer to the action than we are. Is this more of a way to? Is this more kabuki theater, let's call it, between this tension going on between Trump and Europe? Because if you really think about it, if Europe were just if Trump were to just drop out of the Ukraine war and just say, "Hey, Europe, fight this war. You finish it up for us." It might not go too well with the public over there. But if you create like this back and forth, like this, pro wrestling kayfabe between the two, now all of a sudden, if you're European, you feel, a sense of patriotism to stick it to the Americans by not giving in to Putin and the Russians and Trump. Could this be a psyop as well, or do you not see it that way?
No, I agree with you. I mean, this is what Trump's famous for. That's his whole purpose. For example, in Canada, calling it the 51st state and calling Trudeau the governor of Canada. What's the first thing that happened? It inflamed passions in Canada so greatly that the government there is talking about finally building these pipe. We don't have to send this oil to the U.S. We'll send it to these they've been wanting to build people. They've been wanting to build pipelines to the coast. Well, if they do that, what's that do? That puts more oil supply on the world market and lowers oil prices. So Trump is famous for these type of things. Okay, the priorities are in Asia, obviously. The priorities for Russia are actually in Asia. If you listen to what Mr. Putin said recently at a speech in Vladivostok, he said in the year 2100, I'm standing in the place that might be the capital of the Russian Federation because everything's moving to the east. Okay, so Europe. The problem with Europe is that they've been getting a free ride on the U.S. And so there's a reason why you're able to have a 35-hour work week and be retired when you're 52 in Spain and all these other things with a full pension, because social welfare spending is high because they didn't have to spend anything on defense. And so now they're going to have. So again, even if you wanted to put the onus back on them and they wanted to take the responsibility, how long would that take? It's not like, I think the current amount of tanks in the UK Army is 41. Maybe I heard somebody say, maybe I got my numbers wrong. There's 12 heavy artillery guns. I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, the Estonian Air Force has 4 planes. 2 of them are like twin engine King Airs for transporting people. I mean, come on. So this would take a decade, and the people there are not going to trade their welfare state. Okay, this thing's going to be over in a year. They don't have 10 years. Okay, and look, the EU is it's an artificial construct. Was put together for certain economic reasons. It's manifested into this huge state where you have people like Ursula von der Leyen and the globalists who want to create it into a super state with an army. It's not like the United States. The history is different. The way that it was created, everything's different. If you go to Greece, things are different in Greece than they are in the Netherlands or in Sardinia or in Spain or Portugal and in Poland. This is not like the United States where we have this theme of a history that people buy into for the most part. You have 30 something different countries there with histories and animosities that go back, for hundreds of years in some cases, not to mention the fact that no one wants to talk about, for some reason, that's going to be the major challenge for Europe over the next couple decades, which is a rising and militant Islamic population that is now spreading its wings because it's gotten to sufficient numbers. That's what is going to be the real challenge for Europe, Western Europe in particular, is how they're going to manage that. And talking about increasing the defense budget, I said something flippantly on another channel, another interview, not to get off track, but this is important to talk about. Uh, uh, look at the major cities in the UK. They're all majority Islamic now. You could have went to London in 1990, and there were plenty. You would understand what an Englishman was. Now you go there, and 40% of the people are what you would thought were an Englishman, and you have uh, people now that are of sufficient populations where they want to start changing things for the way they want them to be, and so that's going to be a challenge for many of these governments to manage, because these people will try to use the democratic process, but if that doesn't work, they have other means of pushing their agenda. And so, I don't want to get too far down into that, but that's a major challenge that people just ignore. Like it's not going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem. It is a problem. So, Western Europe's got a lot of problems. Basically, they're a non-event. That's why they're not invited to these things. The U.S. looks like it's trying to disengage out of this thing without getting too much, but they better hurry up because, like I said, if it goes on too much longer, and that you can't really say too much about what Mr. Trump says. He says all kinds of things. He could say something on Monday, it changes on Wednesday, and then it goes back to the original thought on Friday. So kind of watch what they're doing. What are they doing? They're cutting the money off. They're cutting the weapons off. They're cutting the ISR support off. They're trying to force Ukraine into a deal. And, I thought I had heard that Mr. Zelensky was apologizing and supposed to come back to the White House. Then I heard he wasn't. Who knows? It'll be interesting if he does come back, if he wears a suit. I think that would be a very telling thing that he's ready to do a deal. If he comes back with his G.I. Joe outfit on and all uppity because he thinks the Europeans are backing him now, then they're just going to cut him loose, and he'll end up like the former president of South Vietnam, who was. People should understand how the United States extracted itself from South Vietnam during the Nixon administration. They just killed the president and put a new one in, and then they got the deal in Paris with the North Vietnamese. So Mr. Zelensky's a dead man walking. He needs to figure out what he's going to do and figure out which country he's going to go into exile, and with his billions of stolen money. So anyways, that's my view. Again, it's going to be very dynamic. It's going to create a lot of volatility. It already is. Look at, where are they going to get this $900 billion? You saw what happened to the bond yields we mentioned earlier. They spiked in all the countries in the EU. So that's kind of a non-starter. So we'll see. But I just don't, when I look at history, and a student of history and reading biographies and seeing the great leaders and statesmen of the world, and in Europe in particular, I don't look at those great statesmen and then look at people like Macron, Stammer, and Ursula von der Leyen in this. I mean, these people are dwarves compared to Bismarck and some of these other people. So um, I just think that they're 100% invested in this project, and they don't know how to. They have no reverse gear, and they have so much sunk. They've sunk so much into this politically and economically. They don't know what to do. They're terrified that the U.S. is going to cut them loose, and then they're stuck. But instead of looking at it as an opportunity to have Europe re-engage, I mean, people should go back and look at the report that was written by the former central banker. I forget his name. Europe needs. This is an opportunity for Europe. They could cut taxes and regulation. They could create a vibrant economy. They can do things like that. This is their opportunity. Instead, they're going to press on with, more Europe didn't work, so the solution is more Europe. That seems to be what they're going to do.
I see. Well, lots of stuff was covered on this podcast here, John. So I think this is a good place to wrap it up, unless there's anything else you want to talk about. I pretty much covered everything I had in store for us here today. But if there's nothing else you want to talk about, go ahead and tell us where we can find you.
Well, I have the weekly YouTube videos that I make that some people find useful. Then I also have a Substack where I talk about, these things all affect things economically, politically. All this stuff ties together to a certain extent. So I write about it. I have a newsletter, and I come up with ideas occasionally to profit from some of these ideas. That's on Substack, Actionable Intelligence Alert on Substack.
Awesome. We'll have that link down below. John, thank you so much for coming on, my friend. Guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to give us a like and comment, "Go, John, go," in the comment section. If you disagreed with anything John had to say, do let me know. I do read your comments. So really interested to get your take. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss an episode. Check us out on Substack to support the channel even further monetarily. That's capitalcosm.substack.com. You also have the link right there, I believe, on my name tag, right beneath my name tag. And finally, support our good friends over at pimbex.com. A really good place to buy gold and silver. Prices are great. And you also support the channel when you support Pimbex. It's PIMBEX.com. All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode. Bye, y'all.